not necessarily tribal or regional.
Welcome back to Daybreak on Trust TV, and right now we'll take a look at the front pages of the national dailies. As usual, we'll start with the Daily Trust newspaper. There, the major story here says manufacturers groan as diesel price hits 1,300 naira per litre. It's hitting us hard. That's according to the truckers. Inflation may get worse, and factories may shut down. That's according to experts. You find all the stories on page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Below the headmaster, it says CSOs raise dust over 18 billion naira INEC supplementary budget. Relief as CBN begins clearing $7 billion FX obligations. And next, next visit. We have every right to invite our Muslim brother. That's Sultan replies the critics. Below there, there's a pictorial of what's happening in the Gaza Strip. People unpack boxes of humanitarian aid from a truck that entered the southern Gaza Strip from Egypt via the Rafah border. Beside the pictorial, we have large withdrawals causing cash scarcity in some locations. That's according to CBN. Trailer crushes 8 to death in Abuja. A sad situation there. Hezbollah, Israel exchange fire as violence spikes at Lebanese border. And reps reject the 5 billion naira presidential yacht pass supplementary budget. Now, these are some of the stories you find on the Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
Now let's go to the Punch newspaper. Right, there you are. The Punch newspaper, starting from the top. Naira gains as CBN pays banks $6.7 billion forex. That story is on page 33 of the Punch newspaper. Besides that, we see Labour tackles Uzodinma. Governor says Ajero meddling. You want to know why he said so? Well, read page 43 of the Punch newspaper. Besides that, we see NNPCL allocates 6 million barrels to Dangote refinery. Interesting. Hopefully, we would see the Dangote refinery, get into action to get Nigeria out of a lot of what, we've been going through with regards to the increase in fuel price and a lot of other issues. But by the way, we see the lead story there. Reps reallocate 5 billion naira yacht vote. Navy clears Tinubu. Navy, not Tinubu, requested yacht for operations. Presidency. Naval spokesman. Senate okays 17.5 billion naira yacht air fleet. Reps approve 546 billion naira defense budget. And below the pictorial, we see Yaba overpass. Others will stop train vehicular crashes, according to Governor Sanwo-Olu. That story is on page 6. Below that, we see Navy busts crude theft on Lagos vandalized pipeline, page 44. That story. Lagos man drowns during church beach hangout. Unfortunate situation there. And beside that, we see Tinubu demands fairness in Bayelsa, Imo, Kogi polls. That story is on page 10. These are some of the stories on the Punch newspaper.
In compliance with PIA, NNPC agrees to supply Dangote refinery 6 million barrels in December. It's one of the story on the This Day front page. Court orders EFCC to immediately release Emefiele. Below the headmaster, it says Wabote inaugurates Genesis Group's head office complex hospitality academy in Rivers State. CBN moves to restore investor confidence and begins clearance of FX forward backlogs. You find all the stories on this day. Now, the major story says Senate passes 2.17 trillion naira 2023 supplementary budget. And House cancels presidential yacht from fiscal document, raises students' loan to 10 billion naira. The federal government's presidential yacht listed in budget is operational for the naval boats. That's a reply from the presidential camp. We have Olasupo Olusi assumes office as bank industry MD and CEO. Now, these are some of the stories on this day newspaper.
And just underneath the masthead of the Blueprint newspaper, we see Uzodimma accuses Ajero of politicizing labor issues in Imo. That story is on page 5. NCAA warns pilots, airline operators over bad weather conditions. Page 17, that story. Wiki approves maintenance of National Mosque Ecumenical Center. That story is on page 5. Also, we see on the strap, 42nd International Convention. Our fellowship not for sale, says ANA President, page 18. You can find that story. And for the lead on the Blueprint newspaper, Students' Loan Scheme gets 5 billion naira boost. Senate okays 2.176 trillion naira supplementary budget. Tinubu never asked for presidential yacht. We see a picture there of the president handing over his party's flag, the All Progressives Congress's flag, to the governorship candidate in the Kogi governorship election. And that's talking about Usman Odudu there. Below that, we see a Hausa musician seeks forgiveness from Buhari after Rarara's attack. JP Morgan assures stronger naira by year ending. You want to read more on the assurances? Well, you can read more on that on page 17. Besides that, CBN begins clearance of forex backlogs. Analysts see stable economy. That story is on page 19. I think you should read more on that story. Let's have some good news once. Rivers crisis. Bala's meeting with Tinubu not to hand over party to president. PDP governors says Fubara Wike face-off has national consequence if unchecked. That story is on page 6. These are some of the stories you can find on the front page of the Blueprint newspaper.
The Vanguard newspaper from the top there carries foreign portfolio investment down 31.9% to 108.9 billion naira. Court orders unconditional release of Emefiele. Tax-seeking insurgents kill 40 in Yobe attacks. Tinubu seeks a fair, transparent poll in Bayelsa, Imo, and Kogi State. Below the math there says FCT, enough for me. I am not interested in running rivers. That's according to Wiki. Ajero in critical condition may be flown abroad. That's according to NLC. Ajero politicizing labor activities in Imo. That's according to the governor, Uzodimma. Electricity policy flip-flop threatens $155 million smart meters project. That is the major story on the page of the Vanguard. Bid requires high turnover cash flow, others in dollar. Indigenous manufacturers kick petition of the federal government, and inter-ministerial committee swings into action. Reports put installed capacity of 4.5 million. The TCN PMU reopens controversial bid, and experts call for cancellation of engagement. Now, all this you find on page 5 of the newspaper. Now, shippers cancel crucial to economic diversification, according to new NSC boss. There's a pictorial of the president, Abdullahi Ganduje, Hope Uzodimma. We have the Timipre Silva, the presidential candidates of the APC in Bayelsa, and also presidential governorship candidates of Bayelsa and that of Kogi State. Now, these are some of the stories on the front page of the Vanguard.
And finally, the Nigerian Tribune newspaper, we see above the nameplate, Tinubu demands free, fair Goba polls in Imo, Kogi, Bayelsa. That story is on page 4. Beside that, we see a picture of the former governor of the CBN. Court orders unconditional release of Emefiele from EFCC detention. Directs Kano government to pay 30 billion naira within 7 days. Read more on that story on page 4 and page 28. And for the very glaring headline there, we see 2023 supplementary budget. Reps transfer 5 billion naira for yacht to students. Loan as NAS approves 2.17 trillion naira budget. We see a couple of riders there. 210 billion naira for 35,000 naira wage award for federal workers. Defense get 546.2 billion naira, 515 billion naira for service-wide vote. Tinubu didn't ask for presidential yacht. That's according to the presidency. You can read the lead story on page 10 and page 11 of the Nigerian Tribune. Also, CBN may begin disbursement of foreign airlines trapped funds. Below that, we see high volume withdrawals causing scarcity of naira notes in some locations, according to the CBN, assures of sufficient stock. We also see below that Dangote speaks on allegation of economic sabotage. Now, these are some of the stories on the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. We will now be joined by our newspaper analyst in the person of Mukhtar Suleiman. He is an accountability expert, a public commentator, and of course, a writer. Welcome to the program, Usman. Good to see you, Mukhtar, rather. Right. So, Mukhtar, I don't know if it's from your end or from our end, but you might need to unmute your audio so we can hear you. You're looking really good this morning, by the way. But then again, let's start with the Daily Trust newspaper.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
So we see manufacturers groan as diesel prices hit 1,300 naira per litre. They complain that it's hitting us hard, according to the truckers. Factories may shut down, according to experts. Inflation may get worse. These are some of the stories that we've been seeing in the coming days, in the past few days, owing to, of course, the rise in the prices of petroleum products as well as the rise in the prices of the dollar. So firstly, what's your opinion on this headline on the Daily Trust?
Thank you very much for having me this morning. And today's Friday, of course, I'm sure that those that want to go party are already prepared. End of the week. Anyway, it's such a very dire time we are in Nigeria currently, because we're actually facing some sort of unprecedented ripple effect of some of the policies that the president actually rolled out all at once. But on the flip side of it is that at least to some extent, we're beginning to see some benefits, which is actually a good thing. The fact that diesel could actually clock up to 1,300 naira for a country that does not have stable power actually does not do well for the manufacturing industry, which is actually a part of the economy that we're actually putting pressure on the president to ensure that it can actually revitalize. So what is left, the little that is left of the manufacturing industry is actually going to die down if we don't find a way to ensure that this total cost can actually come down. And one of the easiest ways I think the president can do this, I've always said, is to just ensure that there is stable power in the country. So if you can actually do that, then you know that people do not necessarily need to pay premium price for those particular goods to actually fund basic amenities. So the president needs to actually look into that. I know that during his campaign, especially during the meeting with the NESG, during his media rounds during the campaign last year, he mentioned that one of his key targets in the first quarter of the year going to the last quarter of next year is to ensure that 10,000 megawatts stable can actually, or I think 3,000 stable megawatts can actually be generated, which have actually been the case for some parts of Abuja, if we're being fair. I don't know about other parts of the country. For some parts of Abuja, there's been relatively stable power, but we have to see how that can ripple its effect very fast to other parts of Abuja as well, and other parts of the country, because Abuja is not a manufacturing hub. The manufacturing hub of the country is down south, largely, and then in the eastern part of the country as well. So we need to see how we can actually help those industries to keep up and ramp up their manufacturing capacity.
Mukhtar, now a lot of fears now are coming up, and experts are already making predictions. We saw this prediction happen with the dollar, Naira changing to the dollar, and it has come to reality, it has come to pass. So now they're saying that inflation may get worse and factories may shut down. What's your take on that? How can the government curb this situation?
I think it's always darkest before the how did they say it? Always darkest before the dawn. Yeah, it's always darkest before the dawn. If you go back to other economists that have actually tried to see how they can actually revitalize from the poor state we were in, they actually had to suffer for the first few years before they could actually begin to see the ripple effects of those kind of policies. Take for example, look at China of 74 to 78. It was a really bad time for China between 1974 to 78. So, but things began to change when they began to actually see the ripple effect eventually. When Madam Nasir El-Rufai, I'm going to use this as an example, when Madam Nasir El-Rufai started the urbanization of Kaduna from the beginning, traffic everywhere, it came off as a very bad policy. but eventually they started enjoying the benefits. I'm not here to actually speak on behalf of the government, of course, but I think I'm also going to say whenever I see optimistic step, we have to actually mention them when we see them. So some of the policies that the president have actually rolled out from the beginning of his tenure have actually been good policies. But the problem with it was that they did it all at once, which was very poor, which was very bad, especially if you look at the behavior of Nigerians. So we have to actually find a way to ensure that this can actually be. But the era of palliatives also have to go. We have to ensure that we don't put in palliatives anymore to see how we can actually ease effect. Because instead of putting a palliative, I think we should just go back to full subsidy. Is that the case? So these are some of the things that I think the Nigerian government needs to look into. And from the Nigerian part as well, we need to find a way to become a bit patient. But I'm hoping that the government actually finds better ways to ensure that implementation side of most of these policies are gotten right.
All right, so another issue, because I know we've had a bit of a back and forth off air, of course, about a lot of issues. One particularly being the passage of the supplementary budget. So I know you have an opinion on that budget, and I want to hear it once again. What's your take on the proposed expenditure of that budget, especially as it relates renovations, procurement, and all of the other factors that we have seen in the budget?
I don't know what our problem is in this country with cars. We sort of like cars a lot in this country. We sort of spend a lot of our money in this country to buy cars for our government officials. I'm not against ensuring that government officials can easily move around. I'm not against ensuring efficiency in government, but we have to find a way to ensure that we can keep the money within the country. That entire amount of money that is being budgeted for vehicle can actually be channeled toward maybe Innocent Motor or GAC Motor or Mikano, and it will not cost as much, and you'll get the same luxury, or far better luxury even, if you ask me, because these are Nigerian assembled cars, and that would actually help in keeping the money within the country, because this would then would in return from the money you buy those cars from them, they will in return pay tax again back to the government out of that money, and then the money keeps circulating. So I don't know why the government is trying to take our money out completely. It's really, really sad and painful. And that's on one side. Secondly, 2.1 trillion naira in 2 months. It's amazing, really, because we know that President Muhammadu Buhari passed into 1 trillion before he left office. And now this president is saying that he wants to actually spend 2.1 trillion naira in 2 months. Now, let's demystify the budget a little bit. Aside from the overhaul of the budget, the fact that it's outrageously 2.1 trillion, I have a big sort of problem when I want to nitpick it a little. Like, for example, the police we've always said that the police is underfunded. So the police is getting 50 billion and the NSA is getting 50 billion. That's outrageous. The army is getting 400 plus billion.
Actually, 515 billion.
Almost 500 billion. That's what I'm saying. So, and the police is responsible for internal security. And you're giving the police, who has about 500,000 staff across the federation, the same amount you are giving NSA, the NSA. I think it's sickening. We need to actually really look at these things, because this is a very serious problem that we actually need to work on. So whatever it is that the Nigerian government is doing as it regards to our budget allocation is, I don't know, it's really, really wrong. We need to actually we take another complete look at it, especially how these monies are allocated. Now, of course, I know, I'm not absurd, I'm not ignorant to know that there's a difference between budgetary allocation and cash backing. So whether there will be cash backing for most of these budgetary lines is another new conversation that we're going to have. And of course, we're going to keep up the accountability watch to ensure that we can actually follow the money in its entirety if there's going to be cash backing from the National Assembly. But aside from that, now I think the government really, really needs to look at how they allocate money, especially for security infrastructure, especially for the fact that the police is really, really underfunded.
All right, Mukhtar, let's talk about, we're still on the allocation of this particular budget. There has been a lot of controversy going on how it has been divided, with the yacht story, and then, you know, the government coming out to say, no, we did not ask for it. So now they are taking the money back to education, which is one of the sectors that needs a lot of money. And even at that, you know, some Nigerians have the opinion that 10 billion naira is still small for the education sector. So what is your take on that one?
I do think 10 billion is small for education, but let's not forget that this is a supplementary budget to the already 2023 budget. So for us to make judgments, we have to, because this money now that they are saying, it's not for next year. It's just for November and December. So of course, 10 billion is fair enough for November and December, if you ask me. That's if the money really goes into the educational sector. But that's if there's no cash backing for that budgetary allocation, because the budgetary allocation could be there, but there will be no cash backing for it. So the money will not be spent because the money was never given. So what we would be more focused on is saying how much the government will spend or will allocate to education for 2024. So I think that is where we should actually channel our energy to. That's what we should be waiting and actually ogling to look out for.
All right. So while we're talking about Nigeria, the budget and the economy, the CBN, on the other hand, is saying that it intends clearing all of the forex backlog. So far, I think it said it has done around $6 billion in payment. How did you receive this news?
It was one of the best news I saw this morning on the news headlines. Honestly, I was really happy to see that, because that's something we've been saying. Because if you can offset the supply side, it becomes easier for the naira to actually gain value against the dollar, and the dollar will be readily available for everybody everywhere. Because then investors will not be scared as to bringing their currency back into the economy. So, because we are largely dollarized, I don't think we should be, but since that's where we are right now, we have to find a way to ensure that we can actually appease the dollar, for lack of better terms, just to ensure that we can actually have more benefits for our currency. So this was actually one of the best things that I've actually seen. It shows that Mr. Kadioso is actually doing his job, and that the CBN team is actually very strong, and they are finding better ways to actually ensure that the economy can actually be revamped.
All right, let's move to another issue now, because, of course, it's important to talk about the upcoming off-cycle elections in Kogi, Bayelsa, and Imo State. So yesterday, the president handed over the flag of his party, the All Progressives Congress, to the flag bearers of the candidates, the flag bearers of the party in each of these elections. So ahead of these elections, I want to hear your opinion on the level of preparedness and the expectations, from Nigerians as well as the electoral umpire ahead of the election.
It's been very difficult to speak to the level of preparedness of INEC or speak in any favorable term for INEC, because we saw how the 2023 general elections went. And until they prove us wrong with this particular election that they are about to oversee, then we would actually begin to say, okay, we can start putting it, because we did put in a lot of strong words for INEC before the general elections, and then they ended up failing us. So we can't actually say anything at this point. They have to actually try as much as possible to actually impress us for the coming election. So going to Imo State and seeing what's happening, I think it's an aberration of law to see what the Imo State governor is actually doing to the labor unions. Of course, it is political, what the NLC president is doing. But it's not political in the sense that it's an opposition. Everything is a negotiation in our lives, in the business of life. The workers of Imo State have, for the longest time, been complaining about how they are being treated. Elections are coming, and this man wants to win election. Of course, the national leader is saying that let's use this opportunity to negotiate better welfare for us. Of course, that is how it works. So I don't understand why the Imo State governor is being threatened by that. It's negotiation. You have to bring them to the table and actually sit down and talk to them. But to see, I think it's the largest form of hypocrisy to hear subnational governors actually say that they are chief security officers of the state when it comes to using the police for their political points, but then go back and say that they have no control over the security infrastructures when there's insecurity. It is sickening, it is disgusting, to say the least. And so what Opus Odima is doing in the Imo State needs to be something that both CSOs and every other concerned parties have to actually frown upon. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If you can do that to the labor union leader, you can imagine what you can do to any other person in this country. So I think this is even close to an election. It's not even scared of losing the election. That's to show you the level of impunity that the governor has actually embodied before the election. So actually, this is something we actually need to check. So I think the governor needs to work on that and find the better ways to address labor issues, as opposed to this. It was really painful to watch what happened to Comrade Ajuri in the news, and seeing that he's not even disposable right now to actually even give a part of his own statement. People have to speak on his behalf. It is really, really sad. It is really, really sickening, and I hope that more can be done.
Well, there is also the issue in Kogi State and Bayelsa. Perhaps you have a word or two to say on that before we move forward.
Oh, yes. I think Bayelsa and Kogi State have always had their issues. I think so. And they are looking at better ways to actually address these things. With Natasha Akpoti winning the Court of Appeal ruling to swear her in just before the November 11th election, sort of tells the Abelu that he needs to tighten his belt. We're just hoping that it doesn't dig anywhere else in the case of insecurity at this point. But we're hoping that the elections can come as smoothly and go as smoothly as possible. And we're hoping that INEC can do its best as an umpire. And after the end of this election, we in the CSO, on the CSO angle, we need to see how we can put in pressure on the National Assembly to pass, to re-amend the Electoral Act to state that INEC should be mandated by law to transmit results. INEC should be responsible for the litigation process on whether the burden of proof of whether an election is free or fair has to be on INEC. If we can start with these two things first, before the 2027 election, then because, of course, policy is not a sprint, it's a continuous process. Not even a marathon, it's a process that is continuous and never ending.
Thank you so much, Mukhtar Suleiman, for your time, for your insight on all,
sorry, before we go, actually, I know we're about to wrap up, but I hope I have a little time to actually say something. There were two headlines that actually captured my attention. I've addressed one. The second one is the issue of the Sultan speaking to critics, saying that we could invite our Muslim brothers. Not to pinch on the sensitivity of that. Of course, I'm a Muslim myself, and I agree that we can actually invite our Muslim brothers into the country. But I think it is wrong when people from foreign countries actually come into this country and then undermine our rule of law. The Sultan is not a head of state. I think Dr. Zakir Naik should have apologized to the Nigerian population, because we are a population of very diverse people. And then we have so many things that are actually going on with us in this country. And you don't come and pour fuel to an already existing fire. So I think Dr. Zakir Naik ought to apologize to the Nigerian people and the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, irrespective of what our reservations is about his presidency and the Supreme Court ruling. He still remains the president by law, and he's the head of state of this particular country. And we need to actually respect that, because to not respect that is to spit on the Constitution. And we cannot make arguments outside of what the law actually says, even if we're not comfortable with what the law actually says.
Well said, Mukhtar. Thank you so much for sparing time to be with us this morning and for your insights on some, of the headlines on the front pages of the dailies. We do hope to have you once again subsequently, of course, to discuss other issues of national importance.
Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to next time.
Good.